why it sucked to be a medieval peasant, and more to the unsung heroes of the Middle Ages, the nameless masses who tilled the soil, endured the plagues, and somehow found the strength to laugh in the face of unrelenting misery. This book is dedicated to you, the forgotten farmers, the overlooked laborers, the perpetually hungry, the perpetually muddy. May your tireless toil, your remarkable resilience, and your surprisingly dark sense of humor finally receive the recognition they so richly deserve. This book is also dedicated to the modern-day equivalents of medieval peasants, those who work tirelessly for meager wages, who struggle against systemic inequalities, and who somehow manage to find moments of levity amidst the absurdity of it all. To the minimum wage workers, the gig economy gladiators, and the perpetually stressed office drones, may this darkly humorous account of past hardships offer a perverse kind of comfort, the knowledge that your struggles, while undoubtedly modern, are also ancient, and that even those who lived in mud huts and died from the plague found ways to find their own peculiar brand of humor. Let this book serve as a testament to the enduring human spirit, a capacity for laughter that transcends even the direst circumstances. For while the details of life may have changed dramatically from the Middle Ages to today, one thing remains constant: the persistent, sometimes maddening, often hilarious battle against the absurdity of existence. So raise a virtual mug of watered-down ale to those who came before us and to those who continue to endure. May your struggles be less, your laughter be louder, and your historical context be far more accurate than the romanticized nonsense often served up in history books. And remember, even in the darkest of times, a good joke can be surprisingly effective at dulling the edge of the scythe, or the plague, or the oppressive feudal system, or whatever else life throws your way. We're all just mud-caked cogs in the grand machinery of existence, and if you can't find a little humor in it, you're doing it wrong. Cheers. Chapter 1. A Day in the Life. The rooster's crow, a raspy, disgruntled sound, pierced the pre-dawn gloom, a far less melodic alarm than any modern contraption. For Thomas, it wasn't a signal to hit the snooze button, it was a call to arms, or rather, a call to back-breaking labor. He stirred, his bones protesting the chill damp seeping from the earthen floor of his one-room dwelling. The air hung thick with the smells of mildew, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke, a perfume uniquely medieval. His wife, Agnes, was already stirring, her movements as rhythmic and practiced as a seasoned mill wheel. Their cottage, a humble affair of wattle and daub, clung precariously to the edge of the village, a collection of similarly drab structures huddled together for mutual warmth and perhaps a shared sense of misery. The village itself lay nestled in a valley, a picturesque setting if one were to overlook the pervasive mud, the overflowing cesspits, and the ever-present threat of dysentery. This was not the romantic Middle Ages of fairy tales. This was the gritty, often grim reality. The first task was to tend to the livestock, a couple of scrawny hens, a perpetually hungry pig, and a stubborn ox named Bartholomew, who bore a remarkable resemblance to their landlord, Sir Reginald. Feeding Bartholomew was a ritual akin to wrestling a greased badger. The ox possessed a surprising amount of cunning for an animal whose diet consisted mainly of straw and the occasional grudging handful of turnips. After this bovine ballet, Thomas and Agnes tackled the fields. Their tools were simple, brutally simple, a rusty plow pulled by Bartholomew, who frankly was less enthusiastic about plowing than he was about avoiding it. A couple of sickles sharper than a courtier's wit, but far less refined, and a collection of hand tools that looked like they'd seen more battles than a seasoned knight. The work was endless, monotonous, and backbreaking. They planted, weeded, harvested, a Sisyphean cycle of toil under the unforgiving gaze of the English sun. The sun, though a vital source of life, was also a merciless taskmaster, baking the earth to a near unbearable temperature and leaving the peasants drenched in sweat and grime. Each furrow plowed, each weed plucked, was a small victory against a seemingly insurmountable tide of labor. The midday break offered little respite. Their meal consisted of a meager portion of bread, possibly several days old, some watery gruel, and a scattering of limp vegetables salvaged from the garden, a feast fit only for a starving rat. The family shared this meager fare silently, the taste of hunger a constant companion. The contrast to the lavish feast, rumored to grace Sir Reginald's table, was, to put it mildly, appalling. The afternoon brought more of the same, endless work, aching muscles, and the ever-present threat of the elements. Rain could ruin a crop in a matter of hours, turning their hard work into a muddy mess. A sudden hailstorm could decimate their harvest in minutes, leaving them with nothing to show for their efforts. Even a slight shift in the weather could spell the difference between a meager harvest and utter starvation. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a spectacle utterly wasted on the weary peasants. They toiled until the last sliver of light had faded, their bodies exhausted, their spirits dampened but not broken. They were creatures of habit, their lives a relentless cycle of work, worry, and the slim hope of survival. Returning to their cottage, the family tackled the evening chores, milking the hens, a surprisingly challenging task, feeding Bartholomew, who always seemed to find room for one more handful of straw, and preparing a meager supper, more gruel, perhaps a bit of stale bread. Then, exhausted, they collapsed onto their straw pallets, their bodies stiff and aching, their minds filled with the anxieties of tomorrow. Would the rain hold off? Would Bartholomew cooperate? Would they meet their quota? These were the questions that haunted their sleep, the anxieties that shaped their existence. Their lives lacked the conveniences of the modern world. Running water, sanitation, reliable food sources, and even basic medical care. Disease was a constant threat, lurking in every drop of impure water and every bite of contaminated food. The village was plagued by outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever, epidemics that swept through their communities like a cruel reaper. The death of a neighbor, a friend, or even a family member was not an infrequent occurrence. It was a fact of life as inescapable as the sun itself. Even the simplest tasks presented the immense challenges. Imagine trying to cultivate a field with a wooden plow, battling stubborn soil and unruly oxen. Envision carrying buckets of water for miles, your hands chapped and raw from the constant exposure. Picture mending worn-out clothes, patching holes in the roof, or keeping a fire going against the relentless wind. And yet, amidst this hardship, There was a resilience, a strange and dark humor that pervaded their lives. They laughed at their misfortunes, their jokes often tinged with cynicism and a self-deprecating wit that bordered on the morbid. They found solace in community, sharing their burdens and celebrating small victories with a gusto that belied their struggles. Their stories were not simply tales of woe, they were narratives of survival, of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. They possessed an intimate understanding of nature's rhythms, a profound connection to the land that sustained and tormented them. They knew the signs of an impending storm, the subtle shifts in the wind, the subtle changes in the soil. Their lives were inextricably intertwined with the cycles of the seasons, the ebb and flow of the land, a life both brutal and beautiful in its simplicity. The laughter that often punctuated their evenings, though sometimes grim, was a testament to their spirit, their ability to find joy in the face of adversity. The stories they shared, filled with exaggeration and self-deprecating humor, served as a way to cope with their hardships, to make sense of a life that was often senseless. It was a life far removed from modern comforts, a life lived on the edge of survival, but it was a life, and in the annals of history, it is these often overlooked lives that paint a vivid picture of a bygone era, a time of hardship, struggle, yet resilience, a time remembered with a mixture of awe and darkly comedic understanding. Their story, though told with a touch of grim humor, is ultimately a testament to the human spirit's enduring capacity for resilience in the face of hardship. It's a story that resonates not just because of its historical significance, but because of its surprisingly relatable humanity. Their struggles, though distant in time, still echo in the challenges faced by many today, making their stories surprisingly relevant to the 21st century reader. The meager supper, a thin gruel barely clinging to the bottom of a chipped wooden bowl, was a far cry from the lavish feasts whispered about in hushed tones amongst the village women. Tales of Sir Reginald's banquets, overflowing with roasted meats, spiced wines, and pastries so rich they practically glowed, were a cruel mockery of their own reality. Agnes stirred the gruel listlessly, its watery consistency a reflection of their dwindling stores. This year's harvest had been particularly unkind, a cruel jest played by a fickle nature. The fields, usually a source of life, had yielded little more than disappointment, leaving them clinging to the dregs of their winter stores. Thomas, his face etched with lines of worry that spoke volumes of years spent battling hunger, picked at his bread, a dense, rock-hard loaf that could double as a weapon in a pinch. It was several days old, at least, perhaps even a week. The exact age was lost in a haze of constant scarcity. Even Bartholomew the ox seemed to sense the lean times. His usual stubborn resistance to work was replaced with a listless slump, his eyes reflecting the same weariness that burdened the family. He'd received a smaller portion of straw that evening, a testament to their dwindling resources. It was a sacrifice Agnes deeply regretted, knowing that a weaker ox meant a weaker plow, and a weaker plow meant a still more meager harvest in the coming year. Their fates were intertwined, theirs and Bartholomew's, caught in an inescapable loop of sustenance and survival. The children, thankfully asleep, were spared the gnawing anxiety that kept Thomas and Agnes awake. The constant worry of hunger was a heavy blanket woven from worry and fear that weighed upon them every waking moment. Each night brought the familiar routine, a silent sharing of the meager food, the unspoken understanding of hunger, and the hushed whispers of hope for a better tomorrow. Their diet was a stark contrast to the descriptions of the nobility's feasts. While the nobles enjoyed roasted swans, spiced venison, elaborate pastries, and overflowing goblets of wine, Thomas and Agnes subsisted on a monotonous cycle of gruel, bread, and the occasional scrap of meat, a small piece of rabbit, maybe, or a portion of salted pork that had seen better days. The scarcity that wasn't only about quantity, it was about quality too. The bread, hard and often moldy, lacked the richness of grains that the nobility enjoyed. Their gruel was thin and watery, lacking the nutritious ingredients that might have eased the constant pangs of hunger. Fresh vegetables were a luxury. Their garden, usually a source of sustenance, had yielded pitifully little this year, the few surviving plants struggling against the relentless sun and the parched earth. They cherished every carrot, every turnip, every meager head of cabbage, hoarding them as precious jewels rather than humble vegetables. A few wild mushrooms, painstakingly gathered after rain, were a welcome treat, providing a taste of something other than the usual fare. But these treats were scarce, fleeting additions to an otherwise bleak dietary landscape. The threat of famine hung over them like a dark cloud, a constant looming presence. It was not a sudden, catastrophic event. It was a slow, insidious creep of hunger, a gradual erosion of their strength and hope. It was a constant background hum to their lives, a reminder that one failed harvest could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The anxiety around harvest time was palpable, the villagers' hearts hanging on the whims of the weather. A single hailstorm could decimate their crops in minutes, turning their hopes into dust. This was a world where the difference between a full stomach and an empty one was measured not in dollars or pounds, but in the unpredictable whims of nature and the often arbitrary decisions of their lords. A slight shift in the weather, a plague of locusts, or a poor planting season could mean the difference between a meager existence and starvation. The constant hunger gnawed at their bodies and minds, leaving them weak, irritable, and perpetually on edge. The children, with their smaller bodies and greater susceptibility to illness, were the most vulnerable. Their thin frames, pale skin, and perpetually hollow cheeks were a constant reminder of the precarious balance they walked. Agnes often found herself waking in the night, listening for their coughs, fearing the onset of illness that could swiftly turn fatal. Even the smallest wound, left untreated, could become infected, turning a minor scratch into a life-threatening condition. The lack of nutrition led to other problems too. The lack of essential vitamins and minerals manifested itself in poor dental health, easily infected cuts, and compromised immune systems. It was a life lived on the knife edge, where even minor illnesses could become a death sentence. The contrast with the well-fed nobility, with their access to better food and medical care, only heightened the sense of injustice and unfairness. The humor in this situation, if one could call it that, stemmed from the sheer absurdity of it all. The meticulous care taken in tending to the meager crops, the endless battles against weeds and pests, the careful rationing of precious food, All this effort for such a meager reward. It was a Sisyphean struggle against hunger, a constant uphill battle that could be undone in a moment by a sudden storm or a blight on the crops. The stories they shared, filled with darkly comedic exaggerations of their struggles, were a way of coping with their difficult realities. They laughed at their misfortunes, at the endless cycle of work and worry, at the stubbornness of Bartholomew, at the capricious nature of the weather. Their laughter was a defense mechanism, a way to find a glimmer of humor in the darkest of times. It was a testament to their resilience, their ability to find joy amidst the hardship. The memories of better years, of harvests that had brought abundance, were like precious jewels, carefully held onto to sustain hope. They would recall those times, those days when their stomachs were full, and the joy of sharing the bounty of their labor, these memories offering a flicker of light in the long, dark night of hunger. But even these memories were tinged with anxiety, a shadow of doubt that whispered of the fragility of their good fortune. Their lives were not just a battle against nature, they were a battle against the social inequalities of their time. The exorbitant taxes levied by the lords, the demands for labor, and the lack of fair compensation created a constant struggle for survival. Every scrap of food, every piece of clothing, every tool was earned through the sweat of their brow, the cost often measured not only in labor, but in hunger. They lived on the fringes of society, their voices seldom heard, their struggles often overlooked. Their story, however, is not just one of hardship and deprivation. It is a story of resilience, of adaptation, of finding joy amidst struggle. It is a story of community, of sharing, and of enduring hope. Their laughter, tinged with grim humor, is a testament to the human spirit's remarkable ability to persevere, to find light even in the darkest of times. Their story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, its ability to endure, to survive, and to even laugh in the face of overwhelming adversity. And perhaps it's in that darkly comedic resilience that we find the most poignant and enduring aspects of the medieval peasant experience. The stench hit Agnes first, a wave of sickly sweetness that clung to the back of her throat and threatened to choke her. It wasn't the familiar smell of dung and sweat that permeated their village, but something far worse, the cloying aroma of decay, of death itself. The plague had arrived. It started subtly, a few coughs here, a fever there. Initially, they dismissed it as the usual winter ailments, the lingering effects of a harsh autumn. But the coughs grew more persistent, the fevers more intense, and the sickly sweet odor, previously confined to isolated huts, now hung heavy in the air, a suffocating shroud over the entire village. Thomas, his face drawn and pale, had been one of the first to fall ill. His usually robust frame was now racked with chills, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Agnes, her heart heavy with dread, tended to him as best she could, applying poultices of herbs and whispering prayers to saints whose efficacy she increasingly doubted. The children, though spared so far, clung to her skirts, their wide eyes mirroring her own growing fear. The village, usually bustling with the rhythm of daily life, was now a desolate landscape of sickness and death. Huts that had once echoed with laughter and the sounds of children playing were now eerily silent, their inhabitants either suffering in agony or already claimed by the plague. The air, thick with the stench of rotting bodies and the acrid smell of burning herbs, was almost unbearable. Their neighbors, the millers, had lost their youngest daughter, Ilara, just yesterday. Agnes recalled the sweet, cheerful girl, her laughter ringing through the village only a few weeks ago. Now, the memory was overshadowed by the image of her small, lifeless body laid out in her family's hut. The millers huddled in grief, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The village healer, old man Hemlock, his knowledge a bizarre concoction of herbal remedies and folk superstitions, was overwhelmed. He moved from hut to hut, his face a mask of grim resignation, dispensing his remedies with a weary hand. But even his ancient wisdom seemed powerless against the relentless advance of the plague. Their attempts at sanitation were pathetically inadequate. The village well, their only source of water, was contaminated, its murky depths reflecting the grim reality of their situation. They boiled what water they could, but fuel was scarce, and the constant need to prepare medicinal concoctions and tend to the sick was a never-ending cycle of desperation. The villagers' efforts to isolate the sick were as futile as their attempts at treatment. The huts were clustered together, offering little protection against the airborne pestilence. Families huddled together for warmth, sharing not only their meager food, but also their germs, their fear, and their inevitable fate. The dead were buried hastily, their bodies thrown into shallow graves outside the village, barely covered with earth. The ground, already soaked with the rain, quickly became saturated, and the stench of the unburied dead permeated the village even more intensely. The dark humor in this desperate situation came from the sheer absurdity of their plight. The villagers, their faces gaunt and drawn, would sometimes share grim jokes, their laughter a thin veil over the overwhelming despair. They joked about the futility of their efforts, the uselessness of the remedies, the inevitability of death. Their laughter, though laced with bitterness, was a coping mechanism, a way of facing the terrifying reality before them. Agnes recalled a conversation with Martha, whose husband, Will, was gravely ill. They sat together, watching Will's labored breathing, the silence punctuated only by his occasional groans. At least, Martha had said, a hint of grim amusement in her voice, he'll die with a full belly. It's more than some of us can manage. She smiled weakly, a gesture that contained more sorrow than humor, yet held a certain defiant acceptance of their circumstances. The contrast between the nobility's opulent lives and the peasants' brutal reality was stark. While the lords likely possessed costly perfumes to mask the stench of death, the villagers were surrounded by it, choked by its ever-present odor. While the nobles possibly consulted learned physicians, the peasants relied on old Hemlock's remedies and desperate prayers. The disparity was a cruel mockery of justice, a constant reminder of the vast chasm between their lives and those of the privileged few. Even amidst the despair, there were moments of surprising tenderness. Neighbors helped each other, sharing whatever meager resources they had left. Children, despite their own fear, comforted the dying with gentle words and touches. The community, though ravaged by the plague, maintained a fragile unity, a shared sense of purpose amidst the chaos. The nightly prayers, once a routine, were now fraught with genuine desperation, the pleas for divine intervention tinged with the unspoken fear that their pleas would fall on deaf ears. Agnes found herself whispering prayers, not only for her family, but for all the villagers, sharing their collective anguish and collective fear. The bond that united them was not just one of shared geography, it was a bond forged in the crucible of suffering. The plague continued its relentless march through the village. Each day brought new losses, new faces consumed by the disease. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of loss and despair, the villagers persevered, driven by a mixture of stubborn resilience, desperate hope, and a dark, grim humor that helped them navigate the abyss of despair. Their laughter, their tears, and their quiet acts of shared endurance were all testaments to their humanity, a testament etched in the face of unrelenting death. Their story, a morbid tapestry of suffering, resilience, and the darkly comic absurdities of life, was a reminder of the human spirit's incredible capacity for survival, even in the face of the most horrific circumstances. And in that grim, dark humor, a flickering ember of hope somehow survived. The chill that permeated Agnes's bones wasn't entirely from the November wind whipping across the muddy track leading to Lord Ashford's manor. A deeper, more visceral chill stemmed from the dread coiling in her stomach. Thomas, her husband, had been accused of poaching a rabbit, a crime punishable by a fine he couldn't possibly afford, a fine that would likely mean the loss of their meager harvest, their only hope of survival. The manor loomed before them, a grim stone behemoth that seemed to suck the warmth from the very air. Gargoyles, grotesque and menacing, leered down from the eaves, their stony grins mocking the peasant's plight. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a symphony of hushed whispers and anxious coughs. Other villagers, similarly summoned before the Lord, huddled together, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. Inside, the great hall was a cavernous space, dimly lit by flickering torches that cast long dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air, thick with the smell of beeswax and something subtly unpleasant, perhaps the lingering aroma of stale ale and unwashed bodies, was heavy with anticipation. Lord Ashford, a portly man whose jowls quivered with every word, sat upon a raised dais, his gaze sweeping across the assembled villagers, with the disinterest of a butcher surveying his flock. His attire, a testament to his wealth and power, was in stark contrast to the rough-spun garments of the peasants. He wore a velvet doublet embroidered with gold thread, a symbol of opulence that felt like a slap in the face to those who toiled in the fields from dawn till dusk for scraps. He was surrounded by his retinue, a surly bailiff, a couple of armed guards, and a scribe meticulously documenting the proceedings, a record of the Lord's arbitrary judgments, a ledger of the peasant's despair. Thomas, his face pale and drawn, stood before the Lord, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked like a small bird caught in the talons of a hawk, his attempts at speaking swallowed by the oppressive silence. He stammered a feeble defense, his words lost in the echo of the vast hall. The truth, as Agnes knew it, was that Thomas, driven by hunger, had indeed caught a rabbit, but the act was one of desperation, not malice. The Lord, however, was not interested in such subtleties. Poaching, is it? The Lord boomed, his voice resonating through the hall. A grave offense, peasant. A crime against my rightful dominion over these lands, my property, my very rabbits. A ripple of fear passed through the assembled villagers. The absurdity of the situation, a man facing potential ruin for a single rabbit, was lost on the Lord. The injustice was as plain as the dirt on the peasants' clothes. The Lord's rightful dominion was a joke, a gilded cage built on the backs of those who actually tilled the land and nourished it. The bailiff, a man whose face was as hard as granite, stepped forward, presenting the evidence. A single, rather pathetic-looking rabbit, its fur matted with mud. It was a pathetic trophy for such a grand display of power. The scribe, with a flourish of his quill, meticulously recorded the details, a cold, precise account of the peasant's despair and the Lord's arbitrary power. It was a meticulous documentation of injustice, a testament to the imbalance of power in this feudal system. Lord Ashford, seemingly enjoying the performance, leaned back in his chair. The penalty for poaching, he declared, his voice dripping with false gravitas, is a fine of 5 shillings and a week of labor in my fields. A collective groan went up from the gathered peasants. 5 shillings was a fortune for a peasant family. A week's labor meant more lost crops, more hunger. It was the equivalent of a life sentence. Agnes's heart sank. 5 shillings was impossible. It meant starvation, the loss of their home, everything. She glanced at the other villagers. Some were weeping silently. Others stared blankly at the floor, eyes clouded with despair. The air was heavy with unspoken resentment, frustration, a silent scream against the crushing weight of their oppression. The humor in this dark theater of injustice was tragically ironic. The Lord's opulent lifestyle, his extravagant clothes, were funded by the very people he now condemned. The rabbit, a symbol of survival for Thomas, became a tool of the Lord's arbitrary power, a symbol of the imbalance between them. Later, as Agnes walked home with Thomas, the November wind biting at their faces, she couldn't help but think of the grotesque irony of it all. They had lost everything. The 5 shillings fine was impossible to meet. They would lose their home and their meager possessions. The weeks of forced labor would be the end of their harvest. The grim joke was that they were already starving before the Lord had begun. She felt the sting of tears and the rage that simmered beneath the surface, a cold, hard anger at the profound unfairness. The next few weeks were a blur of back-breaking labor, hunger, and the constant gnawing fear of further punishment. The Lord's fields stretched endlessly, a landscape of endless toil under the harsh gaze of the overseers. Each day was a physical and emotional battle. The other peasants, their spirits crushed, worked in silence, the only sound the rhythmic scrape of their tools against the earth, a soundtrack to their shared suffering. They were barely surviving. They lived on scraps, shared what little food they could, and kept their heads down. Anger, desperation, and a chilling sense of hopelessness gnawed at them all. And yet, even in this oppressive darkness, a twisted form of dark humor persisted. During their meager meals, snatched between bouts of labor, the peasants would whisper jokes about the Lord's gluttony, his absurd decrees, his utter obliviousness to their suffering. Their laughter, a thin veil over the profound despair, was both a coping mechanism and a silent act of rebellion. It was a way of reclaiming their humanity, a desperate attempt to preserve their dignity in the face of overwhelming oppression. Their laughter was a bitter, mocking echo of the absurd cruelty that ruled their lives. It was a humor born of desperation, yet also a testament to their incredible resilience. The dark humor was their weapon, their way of finding a glimmer of light in the deepest darkness. It was a way to stay sane, to stay alive in their crushing reality. It was a shared experience, a mutual understanding that helped them navigate the bleak terrain of their lives under the thumb of a corrupt feudal system. It was their quiet defiance, their secret rebellion. It was their survival, and it was, perhaps, the most powerful weapon they possessed. The biting wind howled a mournful dirge across the thatched roofs of the village, a counterpoint to the low hum of activity within its cramped confines. Agnes, her fingers stiff and raw from hours spent mending Thomas's worn tunic, glanced out at the gathering dusk. The sky, a bruised purple, promised another night of shivering cold. 5 shillings, the word echoed in her mind, a hammer blow against the fragile hope she'd tried to cling to. It was a debt they could never repay. Their small plot of land, already meager, wouldn't yield enough to even begin paying back the Lord's absurd fine. Starvation loomed, a grim specter at the edge of their meager existence. But Agnes wasn't alone. The communal oven, built into the side of the village elder's cottage, puffed out a comforting warmth. Within its glow, a scene of quiet resilience unfolded. Ilara, her face etched with worry lines as deep as the furrows in the plowed fields, kneaded bread dough, her movements practiced and economical. Beside her, old Maeve, her back bent like a gnarled oak, stirred a bubbling pot of something vaguely vegetable-based. The aroma, though thin, promised a shared meal, a small victory against the gnawing hunger. Another rabbit gone astray, Ilara? Agnes asked, her voice a low murmur against the crackling fire. Ilara chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Not a rabbit, she corrected, her eyes twinkling. More a particularly plump hen, Lord Ashford's, I suspect. The women exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgment of the shared transgression, a secret victory against the oppressive weight of their lives. There was a grim humor to their words, a gallows humor born of necessity. The story spread like wildfire, a tale of audacious cunning that provided a brief respite from the grinding reality of their existence. It wasn't exactly a grand theft, more a redistribution of resources, a peasant-led Robin Hood-style act. It eased the sting of their daily struggles. The laughter that followed, however, wasn't a joyous sound. It was a low, rumbling chuckle, born of the black humor that coated their lives like a grim varnish. Their survival wasn't about the acquisition of riches, but about the shrewd management of limited resources. Later that evening, the rhythm of life continued in the dimly lit interiors of the cottages. Families gathered together, the air heavy with the smell of wood smoke and simmering stew. Tales were shared, not of grand adventures or heroic deeds, but of clever strategies, of close calls, of small acts of defiance. There was the story of young Finn, who'd managed to barter a tattered cloak for a sack of potatoes from the traveling merchant, and the tale of Old Man Fitzwilliam's ingenious method of diverting water to his thirsty crops while the Lord's bailiff looked away. The peasants exchanged recipes, tips for preserving food, and remedies for common ailments. These weren't grand solutions to the feudal system, but they offered a tangible sense of community, a recognition that their survival depended on their mutual support. It was a survival network woven from shared struggles and the quiet triumph of everyday resilience. The tales weren't just entertaining, they were instructional, a passing on of wisdom acquired through years of battling against the elements and the capricious whims of the ruling class. The dark humor wasn't only in the tales, it was woven into the very fabric of their interactions. Whispers about the Lord's latest extravagant feast, or his clumsy attempts to ride a horse, or his equally clumsy efforts to manage his own finances, provided a much needed dose of levity. These weren't acts of rebellion in the traditional sense. They were small acts of defiance, private jokes whispered in the shadows that acknowledged the absurdity of their situation. They were a way to maintain their sanity, a way to retain their humanity in the face of dehumanizing poverty. Their survival wasn't just about the physical necessities. It was also about sustaining their spirits. They found solace in their shared experiences, their collective ability to endure, to laugh in the face of adversity. Their community was not just a collection of individuals. It was a tapestry woven from the threads of shared experiences, mutual support, and a darkly comedic resilience. The lack of proper medical care meant that remedies often came from the earth, passed down through generations, forming a knowledge base shared by the women. Ilara's knowledge of herbs and poultices was legendary. Maeve's skill in setting broken bones, learned from years of tending to injured animals and fellow villagers, was equally renowned. These skills were as essential to their survival as food and shelter. They were lifelines, passed from one generation to another, preserving not just the community's health, but its cultural heritage. The children played their part too. Their small hands, too small for the tools of the adults, were nevertheless invaluable in collecting berries, firewood, and medicinal herbs. They had their own small games, tales of fantasy and adventure that provided escapism from their hard reality. The children mirrored the adults, developing a kind of cynical humor early on, learned by watching the struggles of their parents and hearing the quiet jokes murmured around the communal fire. They observed and learned, internalizing the necessity of community and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. The humor was a form of resistance, a way of refusing to be completely crushed by the weight of their suffering. It was a form of subtle rebellion, the laughter being a small weapon against the power of the Lord and the system that oppressed them. It was a way of maintaining their dignity, of reclaiming their humanity in the face of relentless adversity. It was a rebellion, not in outward defiance, but in the quiet refusal to be broken, the stubborn clinging to hope, the enduring power of community, and the defiant, dark humor that marked their existence. It wasn't a life of ease or comfort or even basic safety, but it was life, sustained by a combination of practical resilience, mutual support, and a darkly comic perspective that was perhaps their most powerful weapon. Their survival was not a passive acceptance of their fate, but an active, daily struggle marked by shared hardship, mutual assistance, and a humor that was both bitterly ironic and astonishingly resilient. It was a life lived on the edge, a constant dance between despair and hope, fueled by the strength of their community and the dark, dry humor that kept them going. They found a strange solace in their shared struggle, a bond forged in the crucible of poverty, a mutual understanding that transcended mere survival and became the cornerstone of their lives. And as the days turned into weeks and months, they persisted, these resilient peasants, finding strength and comfort in their community, their resourcefulness, and their remarkable ability to laugh, even in the face of relentless hardship. Their laughter, a bittersweet counterpoint to their bleak reality, was their most potent weapon against despair, and their enduring testament to the human spirit's remarkable capacity to endure. Chapter 2: The Land and Its Challenges. The sun beat down on Thomas's back, a relentless hammer against his already aching muscles. He wiped a trickle of sweat from his brow, the grime mingling with the dust that coated his skin like a second layer. His wooden plow, a crude contraption compared to anything imaginable today, scraped against the unforgiving earth, each inch gained a victory hard won. The field stretched before him, a seemingly endless expanse of stubborn soil, a landscape that mocked his efforts at every turn. This wasn't the romanticized vision of pastoral life. This was a grueling, back-breaking battle against nature's whims. His neighbor, Elias, was having even less luck. Elias's oxen, usually reliable beasts of burden, were proving stubbornly resistant this morning. One was attempting to eat his hat. The other seemed intent on a philosophical debate with a particularly unyielding clod of earth. Elias, ever the pragmatist, muttered under his breath, his curses punctuated by the rhythmic thud of his own crude attempts at encouraging his stubborn animals. It was a comedy of errors, a farcical dance between man and beast against the backdrop of the unforgiving earth. The challenges were myriad. The soil, far from the fertile loam of modern agricultural fantasies, was often thin and rocky, requiring Herculean efforts to till. Stones, large and small, littered the fields, regularly threatening to shatter plowshares and send tools flying. These weren't accidental obstacles. They were an integral part of the landscape, a constant reminder of the peasant's struggle. And the harvest, far from being guaranteed, was at the mercy of the capricious climate. A late frost could wipe out a season's work in a single night, while a prolonged drought turned fertile fields into barren wastelands. It was a high-stakes gamble, played out year after year, with the stakes being their very survival. This year's crop of barley was particularly problematic. A blight, seemingly appearing from nowhere, had already begun to ravage the plants. Dark brown patches spread across the stalks like an insidious disease, robbing the grain of its strength, turning promising heads into withered husks. Agnes had tried the various folk remedies, concoctions of herbs and ashes, whispered incantations, and even a desperate sacrifice to the local, admittedly somewhat questionable, fertility deity. Nothing seemed to work. The hopelessness of the situation, coupled with the knowledge that their meager harvest was about to dwindle further, was enough to make even the most jovial peasant contemplate selling their souls to any passing devil offering a modicum of relief. The tools themselves were a source of constant frustration. Sickles, scythes, and flails were rudimentary in design, and brutal in application, designed for durability more than efficiency. A broken tool meant days, sometimes weeks, lost to repair or replacement, a loss that could be devastating for families already struggling to make ends meet. The constant repairs, the patching and mending, the improvisations needed to keep the aging tools working were a silent testament to the resourcefulness of the peasants, their ability to coax another day, another week, from tools already pushed beyond their limits. Yet it was also an unrelenting source of frustration, each broken handle or blunted blade a metaphor for the relentless struggle for survival. The unpredictable weather was a constant adversary. Torrential rains could turn fields into bogs, rendering them impassable and destroying young seedlings. These rains also caused devastating floods that washed away precious topsoil, leaving nothing but barren mud. Then there were the hailstorms, those icy barrages that could decimate crops in minutes, leaving behind a scene of destruction that could bring a grown man to tears, and then immediately to a desperate search for whatever might still be salvageable. Conversely, prolonged droughts turned the earth to dust, leaving the crops parched and withered. The villagers were at the mercy of these erratic cycles, their survival teetering on the razor's edge between bountiful harvest and catastrophic famine. Pest control was another constant worry. Rats, mice, birds, and a myriad of insects, all eager to share in the peasant's meager harvest, could decimate a field in a short time. Traditional pest control methods were primitive at best, relying on scare tactics, traps, and the occasional, and often ineffective, application of herbs and potions. The resulting losses were significant, adding to the growing list of setbacks faced by the already overburdened farmers. Even the seemingly simple task of harvesting was a Herculean effort. The backbreaking labor of reaping, threshing, and winnowing was a test of endurance, carried out under the relentless heat of the summer sun. The entire village worked together, a communal effort against the relentless demands of nature. It was a relentless cycle of toil, a dance between hope and despair, performed under the watchful eye of a capricious and often cruel universe. But amidst the hardship, there was a grim kind of humor. The shared struggles, the seemingly insurmountable odds, fostered a dark comedic resilience among the villagers. The laughter wasn't born of joy, but of a shared understanding of the absurdity of their situation. There was amusement to be found in the futility of their attempts to control the elements, the way the sun seemed determined to burn their skin to a crisp, the relentless rain that mocked their carefully constructed shelters, or the way their plans were inevitably thwarted by the most stubborn of weeds. Even the occasional accident, like Elias's oxen's hat-eating incident, could be seen as another amusing chapter in the ongoing saga of the peasants' unending battle against the elements. The irony wasn't lost on them. Here they were, working themselves to the bone, toiling under the scorching sun, battling the elements and pests with nothing more than crude tools and sheer grit, only to have their efforts repeatedly undermined by nature's fickle whims. It was a comical tragedy, a Sisyphean task played out on the endless stage of the open field. Their jokes, often barbed and self-deprecating, were a testament to their resilience and their capacity to find humor in the face of overwhelming adversity. They were laughing at themselves, at their plight, at the impossible odds stacked against them. It wasn't exactly joyous laughter, but it was a necessary coping mechanism, a way of finding some measure of solace amidst the relentless grinding hardship of their existence. And perhaps that was the darkest comedy of all, that their survival depended not only on sweat and toil, but also on the ability to laugh at the bleakness of their reality. The air hung thick with the smell of coal smoke and hot iron, a pungent perfume that clung to everything in the blacksmith's forge. Old Barnaby, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by years of hammering and bellows blowing, wrestled a glowing horseshoe into shape. His assistant, a scrawny lad named Finn, pumped the bellows with the tireless energy only youth could muster. The rhythmic hiss of the bellows punctuated the clang of Barnaby's hammer, a percussive soundtrack to their daily ballet of fire and metal. Another one bites the dust, Barnaby grumbled, tossing the finished horseshoe onto a cooling pile. It wasn't a particularly elegant horseshoe, more a rough approximation of the ideal, but it would suffice. Functionality, not artistry, was the name of the game. That's the third this week. Those blasted rocks are playing havoc with the poor beast's hooves. Finn nodded grimly. The rocks weren't just a problem for the horses. They were an omnipresent foe in every peasant's life, a constant impediment to tilling the unforgiving land. Aye, Master Barnaby, and the plows, they're breaking down faster than we can mend 'em. Barnaby sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured bellows. He ran a calloused hand over the worn wooden handle of a plowshare, his eyes tracing the cracks and splinters. The plow was the peasants' most important tool, the engine of their survival. It was also a testament to their ingenuity and perseverance. It was essentially a sharpened stick dragged through the soil by oxen, a marvel of simplistic efficiency and utterly impractical design, all considered. This particular plow was held together more by hope and stubborn wire than by any semblance of structural integrity. In fact, most of Barnaby's time was spent reinforcing these humble tools, often with whatever scraps of metal he could scrounge up. They're made of oak, strong enough oak, but the soil this year is like trying to plow through granite, Barnaby explained, his voice a rough from years of shouting over the clang of hammer against anvil. And don't even get me started on those blasted flints. They're sharper than any blacksmith's chisel, and they'll go straight through a plowshare faster than you can say, Holy Mother Mary. The tools in Barnaby's workshop and in the sheds of the peasant farmers were a testament to this unrelenting struggle. Sickles, crudely shaped crescents of sharpened steel, were used to harvest the grain, their edges dulled after countless strokes. Scythes, long and heavy, demanded immense strength and skill to wield effectively. Their long handles and sharp blades, despite their primitive design, being able to cut through vast expanses of grain fairly efficiently. Flails, heavy clubs with a shorter length of wooden handle and a weighty, flat head, were used to separate the grain from the stalks, a brutal and repetitive task that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance. These weren't the sleek, efficient machines of modern agriculture. These were tools that reflected the raw, physical nature of the work. Consider the hand rake, an essential tool that existed in a number of forms. There was the simple, handheld version, typically constructed from a wooden handle attached to a small array of wooden tines used for gathering straw, hay, and light debris. Or there was the larger, more robust version, often constructed from wood and sometimes metal. This version was used for larger jobs, such as smoothing the soil before sowing. Each rake was a testament to human ingenuity, a practical tool made from readily available resources. But it was still a hand rake. The contrast between the sheer scale of the fields and the laborious process required to work them was a stark reminder of just how difficult life was for the medieval peasant. Then there were the smaller tools: hoes for weeding, spades for digging, mattocks for breaking up the earth. Each was a testament to the peasant's resourcefulness. They weren't mass-produced marvels of engineering. They were cobbled together from whatever materials were at hand, repaired and reused countless times. A broken handle was often replaced with a sturdy branch, a chipped blade sharpened on a whetstone. The tools bore the scars of their use, each scratch and dent a story of sweat, toil, and grit. But the lack of sophisticated technology wasn't merely a matter of inconvenience. It was a serious impediment to productivity and safety. The slow pace of work meant that even minor setbacks could have devastating consequences. A broken tool could mean days, even weeks, lost to repair, delaying planting or harvesting, which in the context of the medieval era could represent the difference between survival and starvation. Furthermore, the rudimentary tools were far more dangerous than their modern counterparts. A slip of the hand with a scythe could easily result in a serious injury, even death. The repetitive strain injuries were commonplace, causing crippling pain that could prevent a person from working entirely. Barnaby himself bore witness to numerous accidents, tales he would recount with morbid amusement, punctuated by the occasional grim joke and a wry smile that revealed just how deep the line between humor and tragedy really was in their lives. He'd seen men lose fingers to flails, lose limbs to carts, and lose their entire lives to the relentless toil of tending to the earth and animals. "Aye," he chuckled, his voice as rough as the wrought iron he worked. Farming in those days wasn't exactly known for its health and safety protocols, lad. It was a bit like playing Russian roulette with a rusty scythe. The work was not just physically demanding, it was monotonous and repetitive. Hours were spent bending over in the fields, back aching, hands calloused and blistered. The rhythm of the work was a symphony of hardship, the rhythmic scrape of the plow, the swish of the scythe, the thud of the flail. It was a life lived on the edge of survival, a constant struggle against the elements, the soil, and the limitations of their primitive tools. And yet somehow they found a way to not just survive, but to endure, to find a black humor in the sheer absurdity of it all. The grim humor wasn't a sign of weakness, but a testament to their resilience, an acceptance, if not a celebration, of the absurdity of their situation. They laughed to keep from crying, to keep from breaking down completely. The tools themselves, while crude, were often imbued with a personal touch. A farmer might carve his initials into the handle of his hoe, a small act of ownership and pride. A blacksmith might add a decorative flourish to a plowshare, a tiny detail to relieve the monotony. These seemingly small touches, these gestures of individual artistry within the brutal repetition, were small acts of rebellion against the relentless monotony of their lives. They were reminders that they, as individuals, existed within the vastness of the relentless cycle of work. The tools of the medieval peasant were a reflection of their lives, simple, sturdy, and often inadequate, yet capable of accomplishing monumental tasks. They were witnesses to countless hours of backbreaking labor, scarred by countless encounters with stubborn earth and unforgiving rocks. They were artifacts, both of ingenuity and necessity, of survival and of endurance, and perhaps most importantly, they were a constant reminder of the grim comedy of medieval peasant life. A life lived on the razor's edge between survival and starvation. A life where the laughter, though dark and often tinged with despair, was ultimately a testament to the enduring human spirit. The muddy water finally receded, leaving behind a landscape that resembled a battlefield more than a village. Homes were reduced to skeletal remains, their wattle and daub walls collapsed into sodden heaps. The once fertile fields were now scarred with gouges carved by the relentless torrent. The topsoil stripped away, revealing the barren clay beneath. A miasma of rotting vegetation and decay hung heavy in the air, a grim perfume that clung to everything and everyone. Old Maggie, her face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination, surveyed the wreckage of her cottage. A single, splintered beam remained upright, like a forlorn sentinel guarding a scene of utter devastation. Her chickens, usually a source of much-needed protein and eggs, were huddled miserably together, their feathers plastered to their bodies with mud. "Well, blimey," she muttered, her voice surprisingly steady. "At least the rats have less to swim for now." A wry smile played on her lips, as fleeting as a summer's breeze. The villagers, a ragtag bunch united by shared misfortune, moved through the debris with a strange mixture of apathy and frantic energy. They were like ants after a rainstorm, each performing their small task within the overwhelming chaos. Some salvaged what little remained of their belongings: a tattered blanket, a cracked cooking pot, a single, waterlogged wooden spoon. Others, their faces grim but resolute, began the painstaking task of clearing the mud and debris. A young man named Thomas, his trousers ripped and his hands raw, tried valiantly to salvage his father's plow from beneath a tangled mass of branches and debris. The plow, already showing its age before the flood, was now bent and broken, seemingly beyond repair. "By the saints, father's going to be livid," he groaned. His comment was met with a chorus of sympathetic sighs, but amid the sighs, a few nervous chuckles could be heard. It wasn't laughter of mirth, but rather a shared dark humor born of shared hardship. The flood, a capricious and brutal force of nature, had swept away not only homes and possessions, but also their crops, their livestock, and their hope for the coming winter. The granaries, their contents meticulously saved for lean months, were submerged in foul water. The villagers' faces were etched with the worry lines of hunger, a stark reminder of the precarious balance between survival and starvation. Amid the chaos, a small group gathered around a makeshift fire, its flickering flames providing a fragile comfort against the chilling dampness. They huddled together, sharing stories, not of heroism or hope, but rather tales of the flood's absurdity. There were tales of pigs floating down the river, their snorts echoing through the submerged homes, of a cart laden with cabbages, transformed into a bobbing vegetable raft, sailing merrily down the flooded street, of a neighbor's prize-winning rooster, found clinging precariously to a chimney, seemingly unimpressed by his improbable rescue. Their laughter was a mixture of relief and despair, a coping mechanism to face the overwhelming tragedy. They used humor to maintain some semblance of sanity in the midst of chaos. It wasn't exactly a jolly laugh. Rather, it was a dark, brittle laughter that acknowledged the sheer absurdity of their situation, a silent recognition that to break down would be to invite defeat. The rebuilding would take months, perhaps years. Their homes would need to be repaired or rebuilt from scratch. The land would need to be replanted, the livestock replenished. But their spirits, battered but not broken, remained unbowed. Their resilience was not a testament to strength alone, but also to their shared sense of dark humor, the ability to find the ludicrous in the face of unrelenting adversity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ravaged landscape, Maggie surveyed the scene with a mixture of weariness and defiance. A new pile of salvaged building materials lay near the remnants of her cottage, enough to make a start at least. She smiled, a flicker of amusement illuminating her features. Well, she mused aloud, at least we've got plenty of mud to rebuild with this time. Might as well make use of what the flood has left us. Her chuckle, sharp and resonant, echoed through the silence of the ruined village, a testament to the human spirit's remarkable capacity to laugh even in the face of ruin. The next few weeks were a blur of backbreaking labor. The villagers, despite their losses, worked with astonishing speed and cooperation. Men hauled stones and timber. Women carried water and patched roofs. Children helped to carry smaller items, their small hands clutching salvaged treasures, often amid the mud and chaos. The rebuilding process was a grim dance between shared grief and community spirit. The fires were a constant threat, a potential for a second disaster. The floodwaters had soaked everything, and the damp wood was both vulnerable and slow to dry, posing a serious fire hazard. The villagers were acutely aware of this threat, and extreme precautions were taken. Every fire was meticulously monitored. Sparks were carefully quenched. And yet, one evening, disaster struck. A fire broke out near the old miller's house. The fire started subtly, a small flicker of flame amidst the wet and sodden debris. But soon, the dry thatch of the roof caught fire, sending plumes of smoke into the night sky. Panic threatened to overwhelm the village, but the villagers responded swiftly and efficiently, forming a bucket brigade to contain the blaze. Men and women worked together, passing buckets of water from well to fire, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination. The fire, finally extinguished, consumed the old miller's house, leaving behind a smoldering ruin. The flames did not spread further, thanks to the villagers' determined efforts and the timely intervention of the weather. A sudden, violent downpour put a swift end to the immediate threat, but the incident left them shaken and exhausted, but also reinforced their resolve to rebuild their lives together. After the fires came the pestilence. The stagnant floodwaters, teeming with disease, spread sickness throughout the village. Diarrhea, dysentery, and typhoid fever ran rampant, claiming victims at an alarming rate. The already weakened villagers, depleted by the flood, the fire, and the constant struggle for survival, fell prey to these insidious ailments. The air was filled with the sounds of coughs and groans. Homes transformed into makeshift infirmaries were filled with the sick and dying. Death itself seemed a far too common visitor. There was no medical help available, and the villagers resorted to age-old remedies and folk cures. But even in this darkest of times, their humor persisted. Amidst the suffering and death, there were whispered tales of miraculous cures and farcical remedies involving herbs, charms, and even the occasional desperate prayer to saints known for their questionable abilities to intercede on behalf of the afflicted. The humor was bitter and macabre, but it was a lifeline for them. It helped them to maintain their spirits, or at least maintain a degree of their sanity in the face of such immense loss. Laughter, even of the darkest kind, was a way to defy the grim reality that threatened to consume them. The village, rebuilt and scarred, was still a place where dark humor reigned. The shared ordeal created an unbreakable bond among the people, a resilience forged in the crucible of adversity. The ability to laugh in the face of adversity, to find the humor in the absurd, even amidst unimaginable suffering, proved not to be a sign of weakness, but a testament to their extraordinary strength. It was a testament to the spirit of humanity's ability to find joy, even within the depths of despair. It was their defiance of fate, a silent promise to survive, to endure, to rebuild, to laugh again, even if that laughter was a bit darker, a bit more bitter than it was before. The stench of pig dung was a familiar perfume in Ilara's nostrils, a pungent counterpoint to the wood smoke curling from her cottage chimney. It was a smell that spoke of life, of sustenance, of the relentless cycle of toil that defined her existence. Her prize pig, Bartholomew, a beast of impressive girth and even more impressive stubbornness, refused as usual to cooperate with the morning's chores. He'd taken up residence in a particularly muddy patch of the farmyard, snorting with defiant contentment as Ilara attempted to coax him towards his trough. "Bartholomew, you gluttonous oaf," she grumbled, her voice laced with affection despite her irritation. "If I didn't need your bacon for winter, I'd leave you to wallow in your own filth." Bartholomew, seemingly unmoved by her threats, merely grunted and rooted deeper into the mud, scattering it liberally across his already filthy hide. The sight, absurd as it was, elicited a weary chuckle from Ilara. She'd learned long ago that battling Bartholomew's stubbornness was a Sisyphean task, best approached with a blend of patience and dark humor. Her husband, Thomas, meanwhile, was wrestling with Bess, their aging mare. Bess, a creature of considerable dignity, or perhaps simply of considerable stubbornness, had decided that the morning's plowing was beneath her. Thomas, a man whose patience was as thin as his winter coat, was attempting to persuade her otherwise, using a combination of gentle coaxing and considerably less gentle prodding. Their exchange was a silent ballet of frustration and reluctant compliance, punctuated by the occasional exasperated sigh from Thomas and Bess's indignant snorts. Even the chickens, usually a cacophony of squawks and flapping wings, seemed to be holding their breath, watching the struggle with a curious mixture of amusement and apprehension. The whole farmyard, in fact, seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the inevitable outcome of the human equine standoff. It was a scene that played out daily, a testament to the peculiar relationship between humans and animals in this hardscrabble existence. Thomas finally won, his face flushed and his clothes coated in mud and straw. Bess conceded, with a disgruntled flick of her tail, initiating a resigned trudge to the field. Their oxen, a pair of majestic beasts named Samson and Goliath, presented fewer problems, if only because they were too large and too stoic to argue. They stood patiently in their stall, their massive horns gleaming in the morning sun, waiting for their yoke. Their placid acceptance of their fate, however, only served to highlight the absurdity of Thomas and Bess's daily battle of wills. Their sheer size, almost comical in its immense strength, was a constant reminder of the raw power that they represented, yet also of their utter dependence on human direction. They were, after all, the mechanical muscle that made their farm possible. The sheep, a woolly cloud of bleeding chaos, were another matter entirely. Keeping them contained within the boundaries of their pasture was a daily struggle, a test of endurance and ingenuity that Alara approached with a characteristic mix of grim determination and sardonic amusement. Escape attempts were a regular occurrence, often leading to hilarious, if somewhat stressful, chases through the fields. There was always one particularly rebellious ewe who was the ringleader of their escapes, a fluffy menace whom Alara had affectionately dubbed Gretchen. Gretchen's intelligence, however, seemed focused solely on inventing ever more ingenious methods of escaping the confines of the pasture. This daily dance of husbandry was more than just work. It was a complex tapestry of relationships woven from necessity, shared endurance, and surprisingly, a peculiar kind of affection. There was a bond forged in shared hardships, a silent understanding born out of mutual dependence. Ilara knew every nuance of Bartholomew's snorts, every twitch of Bess's ear, every bleat in the sheep's chaotic chorus. She understood their moods, their needs, their stubbornness. They, in their own way, seemed to understand hers. It was a symbiotic relationship, built on the give and take of survival, and seasoned with a peculiar, wry humor that only those who live close to the earth could truly appreciate. Their lives were utterly intertwined with the lives of their animals. The animals provided milk, eggs, meat, wool, and the muscle power for tilling their fields. Their success or failure was inextricably linked to the health and well-being of their livestock. A sick ox meant a failed harvest. A lost sheep meant a loss of wool and a smaller winter stockpile. A pig's untimely demise meant less meat for the winter months. The constant threat of disease, of predators, of the harsh realities of nature, all of this contributed to the ongoing struggle. One day, a fox, bold and brazen, managed to infiltrate the henhouse. The ensuing chaos was something to behold. Feathers flying, chickens squawking, and Alara chasing the fox with a pitchfork, her laughter mingling with the frantic clucking of the surviving hens. The fox escaped, its tail twitching triumphantly, but not before leaving a considerable mess in its wake. The sight of the fox and its escapades, however, seemed to trigger a collective release of tension within the family. The image of the fox, dashing through the henhouse, was an unexpected source of mirth amid the relentless daily grind. It was a reminder that even in the face of hardship, there was always room for absurdity. The loss of a few hens, while regrettable, was far less devastating than the complete loss of the entire flock. The animals also provided a unique form of companionship in the isolation of peasant life. They were not merely beasts of burden, they were silent confidants, steadfast companions in the face of hardship. Bartholomew, with his surly demeanor, was a surprisingly soothing presence in the cold winter nights. Bess, despite her stubbornness, provided a comforting warmth on cold days. The sheep, with their gentle bleating, provided a constant soundtrack to their lives. These animals, much like the harsh conditions of their existence, were a part of their fabric of life, a constant presence that defined not only their hardships, but also their strangely quiet moments of joy. They shared a life with their animals, a constant awareness that their survival was intertwined with the survival of the creatures that sustained them, providing a peculiar sense of unity in a time of harsh realities. Even death, when it came, was rarely a clean break. The death of an old cow, a faithful worker for many years, was met with a mixture of sadness and quiet respect. Her carcass, however, was far from wasted. The hide was carefully tanned, the meat meticulously preserved, the bones carefully cleaned for future use. The death was acknowledged, mourned, but also utilized to its fullest extent. It was a pragmatic recognition of the cyclical nature of life and death, a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and loss. Even in such bleak circumstances, the dark humor was present. The butcher's crude jokes, as he worked on the cow's carcass, were met with both laughter and somber agreement. The laughter was not insensitive, but rather a recognition of the grim reality, a way of coping with the inescapable nature of life's hardships. The seasons marched on, bringing with them the relentless cycle of planting, tending, harvesting, and preparing for the lean months ahead. The animals remained constant companions in this never-ending cycle, their presence a reminder of the fundamental connection between humans and the natural world. The harsh reality of medieval peasant life was often a brutal one, but the subtle bonds between humans and animals and their shared resilience were often unexpected sources of both comfort and dark humor. It was a dark humor born out of necessity, a way to endure the hardships of a life lived close to the soil, close to the animals, close to the relentless rhythm of the seasons, and close to the constant awareness of mortality. The laughter, often bitter and tinged with exhaustion, was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a stubborn refusal to be broken, even by the endless cycle of toil and loss. The well at the edge of the village, affectionately nicknamed Agnes's Agony, after the perpetually grumpy old woman who lived closest, was a source of constant contention. Agnes claimed dibs on the first bucket at dawn, a claim often met with grumbled protests from the others. The water, drawn from a depth of some 30 feet, was often murky and tasted faintly of iron, but it was water nonetheless, a precious commodity in a land where clean, readily accessible water was a luxury few could afford. The well, a simple stone structure, showed the wear and tear of centuries of use, its worn stones a testament to the endless stream of buckets hauled up and down. A broken bucket meant a delay that could mean the difference between clean dishes and muddy ones, between a slightly less thirsty animal and a thoroughly dehydrated one. The repairs, usually handled by a village elder with a penchant for exaggerated sighs and pronouncements about the decline of youth, were always a source of whispered gossip and muttered complaints about the cost of the repairs. The elder, a man named Silas, who considered grumbling a necessary component of his life force, claimed the oak needed to be a special oak to maintain the longevity of the well's support. This, of course, prompted discussions about the rapidly diminishing oak trees in the area. The woodlands surrounding the village were another source of both life and frustration. The peasants relied on the forest for firewood, building materials, and various other necessities. But the forest was not limitless. Overgrazing from livestock resulted in bare patches, while the constant demand for timber left the woodland thinner than it should be. The felling of trees was a carefully controlled process, overseen by the village elder and closely scrutinized by his peers, and certainly not one done without a lot of complaint. A dispute over a particularly fine oak, destined for the village blacksmith's new forge, almost escalated into a full-blown brawl, diffused only by the timely arrival of the village baker bearing a freshly baked loaf. Bribery through food was an ingenious solution, more frequently used than people would like to admit. The smell of freshly baked bread, however, was far more effective than any threat of physical violence. Acquiring wood wasn't merely a physical task, it was a complex social event. Negotiating rights to specific trees, ensuring that everyone had enough, and avoiding accusations of theft or vandalism. These were all part of the process. This constant need to navigate these dynamics led to many tales, many of them told with a darkly humorous twist. One such tale revolved around a man named Edgar, who in his quest for the perfect branch for his wife's new spinning wheel, inadvertently cut down a tree belonging to the local lord's gamekeeper. The resultant punishment was a week of scrubbing the gamekeeper's hunting dogs, a task which Edgar, despite his initial outrage, later referred to as an unexpectedly thorough exfoliation. The land itself, the very heart of their existence, presented its own set of challenges. The arable land was finite, constantly contested, and often less than fertile. The peasants struggled with rocky soil, unpredictable weather patterns, and the ever-present threat of crop failure. Their tools were primitive, their methods often inefficient by modern standards, yet they displayed a remarkable resourcefulness. Every inch of available land was utilized, even the most marginal plots being coaxed into producing something, however meager. Terracing on hillsides was commonplace, as were carefully constructed irrigation systems to maximize water usage, often diverting water from streams and rivers to fields via cleverly engineered channels. Innovative solutions were developed out of necessity. Crop rotation, though rudimentary, was practiced. Composting methods, though lacking the scientific precision of modern techniques, served to enrich the soil and improve yields. The sharing of seeds, tools, and knowledge was paramount, creating a sense of community, but also of intense competition for the most fertile patches. Neighbors sometimes borrowed each other's tools, an act that frequently led to hilariously awkward confrontations and elaborate excuses involving misplaced items. The division of land, often inherited or assigned based on ancient customs, sometimes resulted in bafflingly contorted plots. One family, the Millers, owned a strip of land so narrow that it resembled a giant overgrown asparagus spear. The absurdity of their inherited plot became a source of much amusement at village gatherings, often overshadowing the hardships it presented. The Miller family's ingenuity in planting, however, often outweighed the geographical limitations and produced a significant harvest relative to the size of their land. The constant struggle for survival fostered a deep connection to the land. It was not simply a source of income, but a provider, a life giver, and a source of almost spiritual significance. The peasants understood the rhythms of the seasons, the subtle changes in the weather, and the nuances of their particular plot of land as intimately as they knew their own hands. The prayers to their saints and gods had as much to do with rain and bountiful crops as they did for salvation and eternal life. The limited resources were not merely sources of hardship, they also fostered a sense of community and ingenuity. The village was a complex web of interdependencies where neighbors helped each other, shared resources, and traded skills. These relationships, born out of necessity, forged a strong sense of community and resilience. Even the constant struggles for resources fostered a kind of gallows humor, a dark wit that found amusement in the absurd reality of their lives. The challenges were undeniable, but so too was the remarkable ability of medieval peasants to adapt, endure, and even find laughter in the midst of hardship. Their story was not merely one of survival, but of resilience, ingenuity, and a peculiar dark humor born from the harsh realities of a life lived close to the edge. Their laughter was a testament to their endurance, a defiant sound in a world that offered so little. It was a sound, however, that echoed through the centuries, proving that even the darkest of times can hold unexpected sources of humor. The laughter, though dark and at times bitter, was a refusal to succumb to despair. It was, in its own unique way, a celebration of the human spirit's enduring ability to find light, even in the deepest shadows. Chapter 3: Life Beyond the Field. The village common, a patch of uneven ground worn smooth by centuries of feet, was the heart of the community, and the scene of many a spectacular display of both cooperation and chaos. It was here, beneath the watchful eyes of the ancient oak, that Silas claimed was uniquely suited for the well's support, that the village's social tapestry unfurled itself in all its messy glory. Here, the scent of wood smoke mingled with the aroma of baking bread, the bleating of sheep with the shouts of children, the lowing of cattle with the gossiping of wives. The Smith family, renowned for their relatively sturdy ironwork and their even sturdier arguments, occupied a prominent position near the village well. Old Maeve Smith, a woman whose glare could curdle milk, ruled her brood with an iron fist, or perhaps more accurately, a rusty hammer. Her sons, burly lads named Barnaby and Finn, were perpetually involved in some sort of brawl, whether it was a squabble over the best spot for mending shoes, or a more serious disagreement about the correct way to sharpen a scythe. Their arguments, however, frequently dissolved into fits of laughter as their mother joined in, occasionally belting one or both of them on the head with the aforementioned hammer. Their sister, Eyeless, A sharp-tongued woman with a knack for embroidery and gossip often acted as the peacemaker, or sometimes the instigator, depending on her mood and the amount of ale she had consumed. Across the common lived the millers, their ridiculously narrow plot of land perpetually the subject of much good-natured mockery. Old Man Miller, despite his family's comical property woes, was a renowned storyteller and a master of the one-liner. His wife, Ilara, was known for her delicious pies and her even more delicious insults. Their children, a troop of giggling urchins who constantly chased chickens and got into mischief, added to the common's lively cacophony. They were often at the center of community gossip, for they always found a way to be implicated in the village's most intriguing scandals. The Baker family naturally held a position of high esteem. Their daily bread was as crucial to village life as the well itself, and Thomas the baker possessed a charmingly avuncular manner that earned him favors and forgiveness in equal measure. His wife, Margaret, a formidable woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper business sense, kept the accounts with a precision that would have made any modern accountant envious. Their daughter, Rose, assisted in the bakery and, unbeknownst to her parents, secretly provided a steady supply of baked goods to the village's most charming scoundrels in exchange for interesting tidbits of gossip. The village priest, Father Benedict, often wandered through the common, his kindly face offering a stark contrast to the rowdiness of the place. He possessed a surprising knack for resolving disputes, using his well-honed diplomatic skills and the occasional well-placed joke to smooth ruffled feathers. Though he had a reputation for mildness, he held an astonishing capacity for dishing out withering rebukes when provoked, and the villagers held both awe and amusement for his sometimes uncharacteristic, fiery spirit. Life in the common wasn't all jovial banter and shared laughter. The competition for resources often flared into outright conflict. The best grazing spots for livestock were a constant source of friction, often leading to heated arguments involving aggressive gestures with pitchforks and a liberal sprinkling of insults. Disputes over wood for fires were almost as common, with claims of theft and accusations of trespassing punctuated by shouts of outrage and the occasional well-aimed stone. But even these conflicts were conducted under a thin veneer of community spirit, and there was no end to the displays of neighborly assistance. Even seemingly minor matters could create quite a stir. A misplaced chicken, a stolen pumpkin, suspected to be a mischievous miller child, or a spilled bucket of milk could be the sparks that ignited a firestorm of accusations and recriminations. These petty squabbles, however, were often resolved as quickly as they arose, usually with a hearty laugh, a shared drink, or a peace offering of freshly baked bread. The rhythm of village life continued, with its daily routines and predictable chaos. The seasons dictated much of the village's activity. During the harvest, the common became a bustling hive of activity, with carts laden with grain and vegetables rolling through the scene, villagers helping one another, and the air filled with the sounds of laughter and camaraderie. In the winter, the common transformed into a quieter place, with the villagers huddled around their hearths, sharing stories and making preparations for the coming year, which inevitably involved some heated debate regarding the winter stores and the best means of avoiding starvation. Social hierarchy played a role, even within the seemingly egalitarian atmosphere of the common. The wealthier families, though few in number, often held more influence in community matters, their opinions carrying more weight than those of the less fortunate. However, this power dynamic was often subtly challenged, with the poorer villagers using their collective strength, their wit, and their knowledge of local customs to counterbalance the influence of the well to do. The line between cooperation and conflict was often blurred, with seemingly benevolent acts frequently masking underlying rivalry and competition. The village feasts and festivals held on the common presented a unique opportunity to showcase the village's communal spirit. These gatherings weren't just about feasting and merrymaking, they were occasions for resolving outstanding disputes, forming new alliances, and reinforcing the social bonds that held the community together. These events, though often boisterous and occasionally unruly, were essential to the village's social fabric, a blend of joyful celebration and subtle power plays, all conducted with a distinctive medieval flair. The tales spun around the common fire were a blend of fact, fiction, and folklore, reflecting the village's collective memory and their shared experiences. These stories, often embellished with fantastical details and darkly humorous twists, served as a form of social commentary, a way of transmitting knowledge and values, and most importantly, a source of immense entertainment. Each story, repeated and retold over generations, reinforced the shared identity and history of the village. These events, as much as the daily routines and conflicts, were vital to sustaining the community and transmitting its traditions. The common, therefore, was much more than just a patch of ground. It was the stage for the drama of village life, a constantly evolving social landscape where cooperation and conflict intertwined, where laughter and tears mingled, and where the ordinary and the extraordinary collided, creating a tapestry of human experience as rich and multifaceted as the lives of those who called it home. It was a testament to the enduring human capacity for both conflict and community, a vibrant microcosm of medieval existence, a place where the laughter, though sometimes tinged with bitterness, always held a hint of resilience and a surprising amount of black humor. The common ground, literally and metaphorically, was where the story of the village unfolded, a story marked by its unexpected twists, dramatic turns, and a distinctly medieval brand of dark humor that echoed down the centuries. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a familiar soundtrack to village life, faded as the villagers began to gather. Sundays weren't just for rest, they were for the Lord, and the Lord, as Father Benedict often reminded them, had a particular fondness for punctuality, at least when it came to Mass. The church, a humble stone structure that had seen better centuries, was filling up. A sea of rough-spun tunics and worn cloaks. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies, was surprisingly pleasant considering the circumstances. The pews, if you could call them that, were rough-hewn planks, offering less comfort than a bed of stones. Yet, the villagers settled in with a resigned sigh, the weight of their weekly toil momentarily forgotten in the promise of spiritual solace, or at least a break from the relentless cycle of planting, harvesting, and mending. Old Maeve Smith, ever the pragmatist, used the opportunity to discreetly inspect the state of her neighbor's shoes, her critical eye missing nothing. A poorly mended sole, she muttered to herself, wouldn't hold up through the next harvest. Barnaby and Finn, thankfully subdued by the solemnity of the occasion, fidgeted slightly, their restless energy barely contained. Alice, however, was in her element, whispering gossip with Rose, whose cheeks flushed a delicate pink, a mixture of piety and mischievous glee. Father Benedict, his face etched with a blend of weariness and gentle amusement, began the service. His sermon, delivered in a strong, if slightly nasal voice, touched on themes of faith, perseverance, and the importance of tithing. He spoke of the rewards of piety in the next life, a concept that held a certain appeal for villagers whose current existence was far from idyllic. He also spoke of the dangers of heresy and witchcraft, a topic that always seemed to hold the congregation rapt. The whispers that followed were a symphony of nervous anticipation and morbid fascination. The stories whispered after the sermon were often more engaging than the sermon itself. After the service, the villagers dispersed, their steps leading them towards the common, a transition from the spiritual to the pragmatic. But even the everyday routine was infused with a blend of faith and superstition. The villagers' beliefs were a curious patchwork, a complex blend of devout Christianity and deeply ingrained pagan folklore. They prayed for bountiful harvests, yet also consulted local healers and practitioners of folk magic to ensure their crops would thrive. A common sight was the villagers leaving small offerings at the foot of ancient trees, relics of pre-Christian beliefs subtly interwoven into their Christian faith. These weren't acts of blatant paganism. Rather, they were cautious gestures, a hedge against the uncertainties of life. They might attend Mass diligently, but would still be seen whispering prayers to the spirits of the land, hoping for a good hunting season or protection for their animals. This duality was not seen as hypocrisy. Rather, it was simply an acknowledgement of the multitude of forces that governed their lives. The line between sacred and profane was more blurred than a muddy track after a spring thaw. The healing practices were equally eclectic. Father Benedict, despite his official role, possessed a surprising amount of knowledge about herbs and remedies, often providing a blend of prayer and practical medicine to his parishioners. Yet, alongside the priest's remedies, the villagers also consulted wise women, individuals who possessed an intuitive understanding of herbal medicine and folk remedies, individuals who knew the power of charms and incantations. These individuals were often viewed with a mixture of awe and apprehension, their skills admired while their practices were viewed with a degree of caution. The most prominent example of this intriguing blend was the annual May Day celebrations. The villagers would gather to celebrate spring's arrival, decorating the maypole with flowers and ribbons, a seemingly innocent pagan ritual. However, the celebration was also infused with strong Christian elements, with prayers offered for a good harvest, and the event ending with a church service in which the villagers would give thanks for the bounty of the season. The blending of the two traditions was seamless, a testament to the villagers' ability to incorporate old beliefs with their newly adopted religion, proving their resilience and adaptability. Folk stories also played a vital role in shaping the villagers' worldview. Tales of mischievous sprites, Vengeful fairies and terrifying boggarts were as common as stories from the Bible. These stories weren't just entertaining, they provided a framework for understanding the world around them, explaining the unpredictable nature of the environment and the unseen forces that governed their lives. These stories provided a sense of caution, reminding them of the need to respect the natural world and to tread carefully lest they incur the wrath of unseen forces. The stories weren't just cautionary tales, many were comedic, featuring outsmarting sprites or escaping the clutches of a mischievous boggart with a clever ruse. One particular story, frequently told around the winter fire, involved a cunning peasant who outwitted a grumpy hobgoblin guarding a treasure hidden within a hollow tree. The hobgoblin, known for its short temper and appetite for mischief, was portrayed as a somewhat pathetic creature, easily outsmarted by human ingenuity and trickery. This story offered a form of escapism, showcasing human resilience in the face of adversity and providing a sense of dark humor in the face of genuine fear. The villagers found solace in their ability to laugh at their fears. The juxtaposition of faith and superstition wasn't necessarily a conflict. It was more of a comfortable coexistence. Their beliefs were a complex tapestry woven from threads of religious doctrine and ancient folklore, practical medicine, and supernatural cures. This blend reflected the complexities of their lives, a precarious balance between faith, fear, and the sheer, stubborn resilience of the human spirit. Their beliefs, as whimsical and sometimes contradictory as they were, provided a framework for understanding their world, for coping with the harsh realities of their existence, and for finding moments of humor amidst the relentless toil. It was a testament to the enduring power of faith, fear, and the enduring human capacity to adapt, survive, and then even find a chuckle or two along the way. The stories they told, the prayers they whispered, and the rituals they performed were more than just superstitions or religious practices. They were the very fabric of their lives, reflecting their hopes, their fears, and their extraordinary ability to laugh in the face of adversity. Their world, as bleak as it often seemed, was also filled with a surprisingly resilient sense of humor, a dark humor born from their very struggles. This humor, as much as their faith and their superstitions, was what kept them going. It was their secret weapon, a coping mechanism against the harsh realities of a life lived on the edge, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to not just survive, but to somehow, against all odds, find reasons to laugh. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, vibrated with a different kind of energy than the hushed reverence of Sunday Mass. This wasn't the somber quiet of prayer, but the boisterous joy of a harvest festival, a raucous celebration that temporarily eclipsed the ever-present specter of hunger and hardship. The common, usually a barren expanse of mud and dust, was transformed. Rough-hewn tables, laden with food, overflowed with the fruits of their labor. Plump apples, glistening pears, loaves of bread darker than the night sky, and flagons of ale potent enough to forget, at least for a while, the back-breaking work that had produced them. Children, their faces smeared with dirt and berry juice, darted between the legs of adults, their laughter a counterpoint to the boisterous singing and the rhythmic thump of a makeshift drum. Even Barnaby and Finn, usually a whirlwind of chaotic energy, were surprisingly subdued, possibly overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of food within reach. Alice, ever the social butterfly, was weaving her way through the crowd, her infectious laughter echoing through the gathering. She'd managed to secure a particularly juicy apple, which she was sharing, not without a bit of theatrical flair, with Rose, the adults, their faces etched with the harsh realities of their daily lives, were nonetheless transformed. The lines of worry etched around their eyes softened, replaced by smiles that, though weathered, were genuine and heartfelt. They danced, their clumsy steps a testament to their hard work and the stiffening of age. They sang songs, some religious hymns cleverly interwoven with racy folk verses, their voices a powerful chorus against the backdrop of crackling fires and the murmur of countless conversations. Old Maeve Smith, surprisingly nimble for her age, was leading the dancing, her usually critical eye softened by the festive spirit. Her movements, though not graceful, were filled with a joyful abandon, a refreshing contrast to her usual stoic demeanor. The ale flowed freely, loosening tongues and inhibitions. Stories, both true and exaggerated, were shared with gusto. Tales of near misses with the tax collector, encounters with mischievous sprites, and boasts of extraordinarily large turnips were met with roars of laughter and appreciative nods. The humor, a dark and often self-deprecating brand, was a coping mechanism, a way of acknowledging the absurdity of their lives and finding joy in the face of adversity. It was a humor born from survival, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. One particularly boisterous fellow, a blacksmith named Thomas, recounted a tale of how he'd outsmarted the Lord's tax collector, a man notorious for his sharp eyes and even sharper tongue. The story, embellished with each retelling, involved a clever ruse involving a barrel of suspiciously light ale and a strategically placed goat. The crowd roared with laughter, their appreciation for Thomas's cunning a testament to their collective defiance of authority. Such acts of rebellion, however small, were important, offering fleeting moments of shared joy and solidarity. The food was the star of the show. Whole roasted pigs, their skin glistening golden brown, were the centerpieces, surrounded by mountains of vegetables and bowls of steaming stews. The aroma alone was enough to tempt even the most discerning palate, a stark contrast to the meager fare that constituted their daily meals. There was no pretense here. It was a feast for the soul as much as for the stomach. Even the games were infused with a blend of the ordinary and the absurd. A tug of war between the village's north and south sides escalated into a full-blown, good-natured brawl, ending with a pile of laughing, mud-caked participants. A sack race, featuring adults as well as children, resulted in more spills than speed, their laughter echoing through the night. The chaos was infectious, an antidote to the routine of their lives, but the festivities were not entirely frivolous. Interspersed throughout the day were moments of sincere gratitude. Prayers were offered for a bountiful harvest, a common thread connecting their pagan past and their Christian present. The villagers, with their blend of ancient folklore and devout Christianity, understood the interconnectedness of their lives with the land and with the divine. Their celebrations were a testament to this understanding, a blend of revelry and reverence that created a sense of community and shared purpose. As night fell, the fire pits cast long shadows across the common, their warmth a comforting contrast to the crisp night air. The singing continued, quieter now, its tones infused with a sense of nostalgia and shared experience. The stories, too, shifted, turning from tales of cleverness and defiance to somber narratives passed down through generations. They told of the hardships endured by their ancestors, the famines and plagues that had decimated their communities. These stories were not meant to depress, but to remind them of their resilience, their ability to endure against all odds. As the celebration wound down, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over the villagers. The joy they had experienced was not a temporary escape from their reality, but a vital component of it. The moments of laughter, the shared food, the camaraderie, these were the things that sustained them, providing a source of strength and resilience in the face of daily struggles. The harvest festival, like the May Day celebrations, was not just a collection of games and feasts. It was a testament to their enduring spirit, a celebration of their collective will to survive, to find joy, and to laugh, even when the laughter sometimes had a dark, self-aware edge. The afterglow of the festival lasted for days. The lingering scent of wood smoke and roasted meat served as a constant reminder of the fleeting joy they had experienced. The laughter, though fading, echoed in their memories. They returned to their daily routines, the weight of their work still heavy upon their shoulders, but their spirits remained slightly lighter, buoyed by the memory of their shared celebration, the memory of their laughter, their stories, their unity was a vital component of their survival, a reminder of their ability to find joy, even amidst the harsh realities of their lives. It was a stark and beautiful testament to the enduring human spirit. It was proof, if any were needed, that even in the darkest of times, laughter, even darkly humorous laughter, could be a powerful source of strength and reminder of their shared humanity. The memories of the festival were more than fleeting moments of joy. They were precious seeds of hope, carefully nurtured against the harsh winds of adversity, ensuring that even the bleakest landscapes of their lives could blossom with the beauty of shared laughter. The lingering scent of wood smoke from the harvest festival still clung to Ilas's clothes, a faint reminder of the brief respite from the relentless grind of daily life. The afterglow, however, was short-lived. The reality of their existence, stark and unforgiving, reasserted itself with the arrival of market day. This wasn't a bustling metropolis like London or Paris, mind you. This was a humble affair, a weekly gathering at the crossroads where peasants from the surrounding villages attempted to exchange their meager surpluses. The air, instead of festive wood smoke, held a different kind of aroma, a pungent blend of unwashed bodies, animal dung, and the earthy scent of damp wool. A cacophony of sounds replaced the harmonious singing of the harvest festival, the bleating of goats, the cackling of hens, the raucous bargaining of the villagers, and the occasional disgruntled mouse from a cow that had somehow escaped its tether. Barnaby, usually brimming with restless energy, seemed unusually subdued, his usually bright eyes clouded with a mixture of apprehension and hope. He clutched a scrawny chicken, its feathers ruffled and its gaze fixed on the dusty ground, clearly not sharing his owner's optimism. Finn, his brother, fared slightly better, proudly displaying a basket overflowing with misshapen carrots, their orange hues somewhat diminished by layers of clinging mud. Alice, ever the pragmatist, had a more strategic approach. Her basket, carefully woven from willow branches, contained a selection of carefully preserved eggs, their shells gleaming under the pale sunlight. These, she reasoned, were more likely to fetch a decent price than Barnaby's dejected fowl. Rose, her friend, shadowed her, her own basket filled with a modest collection of herbs and small, wild mushrooms, a testament to her knowledge of the local flora and her tireless foraging skills. The market itself was hardly worthy of the name. A few rough-hewn tables, hastily erected, served as makeshift stalls. Most traders, however, simply spread their wares on the dusty ground, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and resignation. The scene lacked the organized chaos of a larger market. It was more of a disorganized, yet strangely efficient system of bartering and exchange. Barnaby's attempts at selling his chicken were met with limited success. The first potential buyer, a wizened old woman with a suspicious squint, sniffed at the bird with disdain. "Too thin," she declared, her voice like gravel grinding against stone. "Needs more feedin' before it's fit for the pot." Barnaby, dejected, lowered his price, but the woman remained unmoved, her gaze shifting to a healthier specimen belonging to a rival seller. Finn, meanwhile, had better luck, though not without some comedic mishaps. A farmer, attracted by the promise of carrots, haggled relentlessly, examining each one with a critical eye. "These are far from perfect," he declared, pointing to a particularly crooked specimen. Finn, in a desperate attempt to secure a deal, inadvertently sent the entire basket tumbling, scattering carrots across the dusty ground. The ensuing flurry of activity, Finn picking up carrots, the farmer suppressing laughter, and a stray dog making off with a particularly plump carrot, somehow led to a deal being struck. Alice, observing the chaotic exchanges, deftly navigated the complexities of the barter system. She exchanged her eggs for a small amount of salt, a precious commodity that preserved meat and added flavor to their otherwise bland diet. She then used the salt to barter for a length of coarse wool, carefully negotiating with a weaver who was initially reluctant to part with his valuable stock. The entire process involved a complex series of exchanges and counter-offers, a silent language spoken fluently only by those who had spent their lives navigating the limitations of a resource-scarce economy. The transactions were rarely straightforward. Payment often involved a combination of goods and services. A loaf of bread might be exchanged for a day's work in the field. A handful of nuts might be traded for the repair of a broken tool, and a skillfully woven basket might secure a supply of firewood for the winter. Money, in its recognizable form, was scarce. Coins were mainly used by the upper classes. Peasants largely relied on barter, a system that demanded a profound understanding of the relative value of different goods and services. The humor, as always, arose from the absurdity of their situation. A farmer attempting to sell a piglet that was demonstrably smaller than his own hand. A woman offering her services as a midwife in exchange for a small tub of butter. Two men arguing vehemently over the relative merits of different types of potatoes. These were all common occurrences. The laughter, sometimes tinged with desperation, was a coping mechanism, a way of acknowledging the inherent unfairness and the sheer ridiculousness of their lot in life. The day ended with a mixture of successes and failures. Barnaby, having failed to sell his chicken, was forced to carry it home, a heavy burden both literally and metaphorically. Finn, however, returned with a sense of accomplishment, his pockets filled with a few coins, and his heart lighter thanks to the unexpected turn of events. Alice, her basket still half full, made her way home, her mind already strategizing for next week's market. Her success wasn't due to exceptional business acumen, but rather to an acute awareness of the subtle rules of this unconventional economy, a system that relied as much on trust, relationships, and social capital as it did on the value of goods. Even the sun setting cast long shadows across the gathering, the waning light highlighting the uneven distribution of wealth and opportunity. Yet, amidst the inherent inequalities, there was a certain resilience, a quiet dignity in the way these peasants faced the challenges of their daily lives. Their laughter, their bartering, their intricate system of exchanges, it was all part of a complex tapestry woven from hardship and ingenuity, revealing a society far more nuanced and fascinating than the simplistic narratives might suggest. The market day, for all its limitations and absurdities, was a microcosm of their lives, a reflection of their resourcefulness, their unwavering spirit, and their darkly comedic ability to find humor in even the most desperate of circumstances. The memory of the market day's chaotic energy, the pungent smells, and the sheer grit of it all would linger alongside the harvest festival's joyous echo. It was, after all, a necessary part of their story, proof of their indomitable will to survive, trade, and laugh, even in the face of hardship and scarcity. The biting wind whipped across the sparsely treed hilltop, tugging at the rough-spun cloaks of the mourners gathered around Alara's grave. It wasn't a grand affair, no ornate stone monument or weeping angels. Alara, like most of the villagers, had lived a life too preoccupied with the necessities of survival to afford such luxuries. Her grave, a simple mound of earth, was marked only by a rough-hewn wooden cross, hastily crafted from a branch scavenged from the nearby woods. The cross, already showing signs of splintering under the relentless assault of the elements, was a fitting metaphor for the brevity and fragility of life in their harsh world. Still, a surprising amount of warmth emanated from the gathering, a stark contrast to the bleak landscape. Laughter, quiet and subdued, but undeniably present, punctuated the solemnity of the occasion. It wasn't the boisterous, carefree laughter of the harvest festival, but a different kind, a weary acknowledgment of life's absurdities, even in the face of death. Old Maggie, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of toil and sun, chuckled, recalling Alara's infamous incident with the runaway pig. "Remember that time, lads and lasses?" she croaked, her voice raspy but clear. "She chased that beast for half the day, right through Farmer Giles's prize-winning turnips." The look on Giles's face, priceless. A ripple of amusement went through the crowd. The memory, a small, insignificant anecdote in the grand scheme of things, served as a testament to Ilara's spirit, her boundless energy, and her uncanny ability to find humor in even the most inconvenient situations. Finn, his usual boisterous demeanor tempered by grief, recounted how Ilara had once outbartered even Eyeless at the weekly crossroads market, securing a whole side of bacon for a measly handful of mushrooms and a well-worn sharpening stone. The story, told with a mixture of respect and amusement, highlighted Ilara's resourcefulness and shrewdness, qualities that had made her a respected member of the community. Even Barnaby, perpetually overshadowed by his siblings' more impressive feats, contributed to the remembrance. He spoke of Ilara's quiet acts of kindness, the extra helping of stew she always shared with him, the mending of his torn trousers, the way she patiently taught him how to coax the most from their meager garden patch. Barnaby's contribution, although simple, was deeply moving, revealing a depth of affection and gratitude often unspoken in their close-knit community. Death, in their world, wasn't a mysterious or frightening event. It was a natural part of the cycle, as familiar and unavoidable as the changing seasons. Their rituals were simple, devoid of elaborate ceremonies and mystical incantations. They gathered, shared memories, both funny and poignant, and then laid their loved ones to rest. There were no elaborate mourning periods, no extended displays of grief. Life, in all its harsh reality, demanded a swift return to the daily grind. The fields would not plow themselves, and the animals would not tend themselves. The pragmatism, however, wasn't devoid of sentiment. It stemmed from a deep understanding of their interdependence, their shared reliance on each other for survival. Ilara's absence would be felt, her contributions sorely missed, but life would go on. The community, in its own way, would adapt, filling the void left behind with collective effort. Alice, ever the pragmatic one, had prepared a small feast in honor of Ilara, a simple affair of bread, cheese, and ale. The food, shared amongst the mourners, served as a reminder of Ilara's generosity and warmth, a subtle but powerful counterpoint to the somber occasion. It was a celebration of life, of Ilara's impact on their lives, and a symbolic acknowledgement of their continued existence. The shared meal, far from being a somber occasion, turned into an informal gathering, a testament to their resilience and ability to find joy even amidst sorrow. Old Maggie's stories flowed freely, punctuated by fits of laughter that echoed through the windswept hilltop. Finn, ever the storyteller, regaled them with exaggerated tales of Ilara's adventures, his voice filled with warmth and affection. Barnaby, his initial shyness overcome, joined in, sharing his own simple memories, his small but significant contributions to the communal remembrance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, the mourners slowly dispersed, their hearts filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and contentment. Ilara's memory would live on, not in grand monuments or formal eulogies, but in the shared laughter, the quiet acts of kindness, the ongoing resilience of their community. Her life, though short and marked by hardship, had left an indelible mark on their lives, a silent testament to the power of human connection and the enduring spirit of those who face adversity with grace, humor, and an unwavering commitment to life's simple joys. The wind continued to howl across the barren landscape, But amidst the mournful sounds, there was a distinct undercurrent of resilience. Ilara's physical presence might have been gone, but her spirit, like the tenacious wildflowers that clung stubbornly to the harsh soil, had taken root in the hearts of those left behind, a testament to the lasting impact of a life lived fully, despite the unrelenting hardships of the medieval world. Her legacy was not etched in stone, but woven into the fabric of their lives, a tangible reminder of her kindness, her humor, and the strength of the community she helped to shape. The following days and weeks brought the usual cycle of work and survival. The fields needed tilling, the animals needed feeding, the daily struggle for sustenance continued. But the memory of Ilara, her laughter, her spirit, remained woven into the fabric of their lives. Even the most mundane tasks seemed to be infused with a quiet sense of purpose, a subtle reminder of Ilara's contribution to their collective well-being. Her absence was felt, of course, but her memory persisted, not as a burden of grief, but as a source of strength, a reminder of their ability to endure, to adapt, and to find joy, even in the harshest of circumstances. Life went on, as it always did. The rhythm of the seasons continued, marking the passage of time with relentless precision. The harvest festivals came and went, punctuated by the harsh realities of winter and the endless cycle of labor. But within this persistent cycle of work and survival, there was a quiet resilience, a palpable sense of community that Ilara had helped to cultivate. Her legacy, unspoken yet ever present, served as a subtle reminder of the profound impact a single life can have on a community, especially in a world where death was a constant companion and the simple act of survival was a testament to resilience and the enduring human spirit. The earth, having received her, continued to produce its bounty, a poignant reminder of the cycle of life, death, and the ever-present hope that life always finds a way to continue, even after the harshest of winters. The laughter, the bartering, the simple acts of kindness, these were Ilara's enduring legacy, a testament to the strength and spirit of a community that had learned to laugh in the face of adversity and to find solace and strength in the midst of grief.